Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing the topic of unit conversions using dimensional analysis. Now, for starters, what is dimensional analysis? Well, dimensional analysis, also known as the unit factor method, is basically a method for converting between units by multiplying by fractions that are equivalent to 1. An example of this might be something like 12 inches in 1 foot. This is basically a fraction that is equivalent to 1. There are 12 inches in 1 foot, therefore what's on top here is equal to what's on bottom here. This fraction is equivalent to 1. The idea behind the unit factor method, or dimensional analysis, is that we are going to use unit factors like this to go between different sets of units. So we'll look at 3 examples of how we can sort of do this. The first one we have here is how many seconds are in 5.5 days. Now, I would venture to say that most people are not necessarily going to know off the top of their head how many seconds are in 5.5 days, or how many seconds are in 1 day even. Some of you might, I don't know. But let's say we don't know that. There's a couple things that we do know that can help us bridge this gap between days and seconds. So we're starting off with 5.5 days. And even if we don't know how many seconds are in 1 day, we know that 1 day is 24 hours. We also know that 1 hour is 60 minutes, and 1 minute is 60 seconds. Now, this is sort of a way that we can go by step to get from days to seconds. So we don't have anything here that goes directly from days to seconds, but we can go from days to hours to minutes, and then finally to seconds. How do we do this? Well, let's say we are starting with our 5.5 days. We effectively have days on top here if this were a fraction. So what we can do next is we multiply it by a unit factor where we have days on bottom. In this case, of our conversion factors up here, we have 1 day is 24 hours, so we'll have 1 day on bottom here, and 24 hours on top. All right? So we have days on top here, days on bottom. These two are going to cancel out and give us something with hours. So now we can do the same thing to go from hours to minutes. Hours on top here, we want hours on bottom here. 1 hour is 60 minutes. And then our final step, we want to go from minutes to seconds. So minutes on top here, we're going to have minutes on bottom here, and 1 minute is 60 seconds. So if we look at where our units are on this, hours on top here cancels out with hours on bottom here. Same thing with minutes on top here, minutes on bottom here. So what this is ultimately going to give us, if we multiply all the way through here, is an answer in seconds. Now, if we put this into our calculator, the way that we do this, since all of our numbers that are not 1 are on top here, all we have to do is multiply out 5.5 times 24 times 60, and then times 60 again. And what that gives us is 475,200 seconds. So in this example, we are dealing with all units that are more or less in the same system with time. We don't really have to deal with the issue of converting between say, metric and imperial units. These next two examples that we look at, we will deal with converting between metric and imperial units. So, second example, what is the price of 19.7 liters of gas? And we have our price here of $3.20 per gallon. So the problem here is that we are given the volume of gas that we want in liters, and our price is per gallon. How do we get around this problem? Well, we need some way to figure out how many gallons of gas we have in this 19.7 liters. So, as far as going between liters and gallons go, there's a few different ways that you can do this. What works best for you may depend on what conversion factors you have in your head or what conversion factors are readily available or provided for you. One that I always like to provide for my students on exams is that 1 liter is 1.06 quarts. This is an approximate conversion factor, but for our purposes, it will work for this problem. So, we have liters and quarts. So we still have the issue of getting to gallons. Fortunately, we also know that 1 gallon is 4 quarts. This allows us to sort of bridge the gap between liters and gallons, and then therefore get the dollars. So, starting with 19.7 liters, we have liters on top here, so we want liters to be on bottom next. So we're going to use this conversion factor right here, going from liters to quarts. We have 1 liter on bottom. On top, we have 1.06 quarts. All right, now, the next step, we want to go from quarts to gallons. So in this case, we have quarts on top here, we want quarts on bottom now. So we have our next conversion factor, which is that 1 gallon is equal to 4 quarts. Now, notice on this one that we have, instead of having 1 on bottom and something else on top like we did for everything else so far, we have 1 on top and something else on bottom. What this basically means is that when we get to this conversion factor, when we're multiplying everything out, instead of multiplying by 4, we're going to divide by 4. Or another way you could think about this is we are multiplying by 1 over 4. All right? So now this is enough to give us something in gallons. So the last step is to figure out our price. And our price, we are told in the problem statement, is $3.20 per gallon. So we're going to have 1 gallon on bottom, and then on top, $3.20. All right, now, if we multiply all of this out, when we're putting this into our calculators, what we want to do is we want to take 19.7 liters as our starting value times 1.06 divided by 4 times 320, or 3.2, you could say. And this is ultimately going to give us a price of $16.70. All right, so this would be an example of a problem where we are converting between metric units and imperial units. Now, this next problem that we have, how many meters are in 7,220 feet? This would also be an example where we are dealing with both metric and imperial units. In this case, we are starting with an imperial unit, feet, and we want to go to a metric unit, meters. Once again, this is a scenario where what's going to be easiest for you is dependent on what conversion factors are most readily available to you. So, for the purposes of today, one conversion factor that I like to give my students on exams, and this is an exact conversion factor, is that 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. All right? This conversion factor is exact. 1 inch is exactly, not approximately, but exactly 2.54 centimeters. So this gets us from inches to centimeters, but we want to go from meters to feet. So how can we find ways to basically use this conversion factor to get from feet to meters? Well, in addition to this conversion factor, we also know that there are 12 inches in 1 foot, so 1 foot equals 12 inches. And one nice thing about metric units is that we have these really helpful prefixes. So just from the name, centimeters, centa is the prefix for 1/100th. So what that tells us is that 1 meter is going to be 100 centimeters, or put another way, you could say that a centimeter is 1/100th of a meter. Now, at this point, we're ready to go ahead and start doing our actual conversions here. So we are starting with 7220 feet. So the first step here is we want to go from feet to inches. So we have here that 1 foot is 12 inches. Feet on top here, feet on bottom here. We also know that 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. And then finally, our last step is to go from centimeters to meters. So in this case, we have 100 centimeters on bottom and 1 meter on top. So as with any other dimensional analysis problem, one way that we can sort of check ourselves and make sure that we set this up correctly is we can see if the units cancel out. In this case, we have feet here on top, feet on bottom here. Those cancel. Inches on top, inches on bottom cancel. Centimeters on top and centimeters on bottom cancel, leaving us with just meters on top. So if we put this all into our calculator, we have 7220 times 12 times 2.54 divided by 100. And what this ultimately gives us is 2201 meters. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this helps with your understanding of unit conversions and dimensional analysis. If you have questions, please feel free to let me know.